The USA, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada announced today that their Five Eyes coalition believes that current models like Mythos can break critical NSA and Department of Defense cybersecurity system in hours, and that the coming months will create existential cybersecurity risk for world governments. So that's the news that we start today with. Now let's talk about what that means for our access to these models, because if world governments believe that they will not have the ability to protect their deepest secrets and their spying operations and their military infrastructure in the coming months, then what hope do we have to access the latest models like Mythos if that's what they can do? So, Ian, I want to just unpack this today. There was a ton of news and a ton of data that got released in the last few hours, and we wanted to sift through it, because the big question that you had last week is, are we ever going to get access to Fable again? And so we have the betting odds on that as well.
Yeah, we do. And Matt, this started out not even 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, late on a Friday afternoon. And we found out the general public was losing access to this. The first volley of retorts from Anthropic and the industry was, hey, this isn't an issue. Right, you found a weird jailbreak that's, viable in a bunch of different models. Don't worry about it. It began to get, and we said it last week, it began to get more concerning by the middle of the week when we hadn't heard anything. Here we are, the following week of June 22nd, and the information is not positive. It would appear to be a lot more serious than we thought. And the timelines of people had thought is, hey, we're sort of years away from having to deal with AI that could break into a bunch of our systems. And now the predictions are months. And in fact, you had a quote from somebody, a Democrat, I can't remember who it was exactly,
It was Mark
suggesting,
Warner, who's the vice chair of the, I think, Senate Intelligence Committee, and a General Joshua Rudd, and I'm just doing from memory, you can go look it up, told him in that Intelligence Committee briefing that it took hours, not weeks, to break in. And that's probably Mythos plus a lot of other capabilities, but Mythos being this missing piece that destabilizes all of the security kind of equilibrium that we thought we had. That, oh, well, it'll take Russia this amount of time to do this, or take China this amount of time to do this. Now with Mythos, which they have, and the Chinese will very likely have something equivalent, if not now, then very soon. The NSA is not ready. The DoD is not ready, according to Mark Warner, who's a prominent Democrat.
we're not ready. And let's take a beat on the point you just made. Mythos is the thing that we're all focused on. We're all concerned about, okay, so this thing is really powerful, and let's put guardrails around that. And it's almost like we've isolated this thing that we're worried about. You just mentioned a bunch of new models have come out of China yesterday. I can't remember what it's called. It's like 5.2, something, something,
GLM
something.
5.2,
I
yeah.
haven't had a chance to play with it yet. It apparently is pretty powerful. So it's within the range of the last two or three versions of models we've received as a public.
Yeah,
So
they're
what does
just
that
a
say? It says
few
they're not
months
far
behind,
behind.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Mythos became available to Anthropic internally in February. We still don't have access, and we probably never will have access to the unguarded Mythos, but they released a version Fable, like I said, 13, 14 days ago. You used it to develop an application for racing. You do
Yeah.
go-kart
Race car
racing,
telemetry. Yeah.
race car telemetry that was as good as or actually was better than the model that you had purchased, the software that you had purchased from the vendor. And so we were just very excited about this Fable model, and then they took it away. But if the Chinese are maybe 6 months behind us, and that capability of Mythos is 4 months old, well, then how long until the Chinese government has the same capability without guardrails that Mythos has? And I think that's the very important piece to this, is that the Trump administration, for some reason, does not like Dario. You can imagine why. And they don't like Anthropic. So they took away their model. But the Chinese are under no restriction in the same way that Anthropic is. So, we're not talking about, hey, we can just stop Mythos. OpenAI just announced today 5.5 coding or 5.5 code or crypto or cyber or something. They're terrible at naming. They're the worst at naming, but 5.5 cyber might be the name of it, which they reported that they are beating the Mythos benchmarks. And so even though Mythos is not available to us and neither is Fable, if you believe the quality of these benchmarks, then OpenAI has made available models that are better than Mythos. And so you got to expect that there's nothing specific that Anthropic has done other than they trained a great model and they were a few months ahead. But scaling laws mean that you just train more on larger models and you get the same results. And there's nothing really that important about the particular methodology that Anthropic had, or they don't have some special sauce that's only to them. They have it, OpenAI has it, and you can almost be certain that the Chinese will have it when they get access to a significant enough amount of computing, which, at some point they just have to compute a little bit longer on their existing hardware or consolidate all their hardware together, and they can produce these NSA level code breaking applications. And so every military installation in the world is now going to be, if not now, then in the next few months, vulnerable to hacking by China or any of their allies if China chooses. They could be installing backdoors, they could be stealing information, they could be blackmailing people, and they could be fixing all of the bugs that we have been cataloging over the last, however many years. They give us access to spying on them. And so we will lose access to understanding the quality of their nuclear programs. Countries like North Korea and Iran might be able to make deals with China to get rid of all the bugs that we've put into all of their communication and computation hardware. So very radical change in the world order is possible, and a very significant modification to the security stance of the Five Eyes, which is the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, as well as Europe. We're not just talking about like, oh, these models are fun for making vibe coding. This is really, really important stuff. And this is along the route of what we had talked about last year with the AI 2027 report, which is this very doom that by 2027, the world is going to be in big trouble. Well, that's what they were talking about in early 2026, is that models would be capable of doing this exact kind of thing.
If you don't live every day in the software world, it might not be apparent to you what a huge challenge this is. There is, everywhere you look in your world, there is software. It might be sitting inside of hardware, but everywhere you look is software. And there's a tremendous amount of inertia. And I know we have AI now to fix stuff and go in and do all of this stuff. But we talked about it in an earlier episode. The early insights from Project Glasswing were suggesting that there was more bugs than the humans could actually get to review and understand and ultimately fix. So it's arguably worse. We kind of understand it a bit better, but it's at a larger scale than we thought it to be even a week ago. And so you have, the other thing about software is you have these layers. So at the bottom, you have all your infrastructure, right? You have these protocols that you learn when you're in university and you never talk about again because you never see packets flying around and you never see kind of complex communication happening. But it's all happening in the background. And you might see, for example, if you ever look at a URL bar on your web page, HTTPS, there's one of many, many, many protocols. If you can inject yourself inside of those protocols and do stuff and get access to information, you can do some really, really powerful stuff. We're talking about stealing money. We're talking about getting access to bank type of stuff. We're talking about a bunch of different stuff. That's just the infrastructure layer. And just to give you a sense of how old some of that infrastructure layer, if you go to banking or insurance particularly, COBOL is the language that was used to write a bunch of that. And I worked with a large insurance company in the Southern Hemisphere, and they had two guys left that could go in and modify the mainframe COBOL code. And this was for a huge insurance company. So think about the absolute scale of stuff that has to be fixed. And we haven't talked about application layer. We haven't talked about your company and my company, Matt, what we do in terms of building software and potentially maintain it and all of these different things. So it's almost infinite, the surface area that can be attacked. The most concerning, of course,
And I think
is the infrastructure.
that's really the topic I wanted to bring up today, is that we can go back about what our preferred policy would be, or what we can do to fix some of this stuff, because of course the same models that we're worried about breaking all these codes are also capable of fixing all these things, and that's what Project Glasswing is. And there's OpenAI announced today another one called Project Daybreak, which the name of the researcher who built their coding evaluation tool at Berkeley is named Dawn. I'm wondering if they were sucking up to the benchmark creator by calling it Daybreak, since her first name is Dawn. Anyway, they have all these programs like Daybreak and Glasswing to fix these things, so that we can fix these things. We can also talk about how it's going to change access to models, right? In particular, Project Glasswing and Daybreak are made available to only particular institutions. And I use the word institutions very specifically. Individuals are not going to be given access to these models, perhaps ever. Institutions will. Institutions add security and trust in the same way that it might be very difficult for an individual to work with a company, but they can join another company, and that company has an MSA and an NDA and all these things. And so when you join an institution as an individual, you get access to these capabilities. Right now, the really only institutions that grant access are you work for Oracle or one of the Glasswing or Daybreak partners. But we might imagine some kinds of guilds or professional institutions that guarantee, hey, our members are bound by professional ethics and oversight to do this. So that's emerging. But the big topic we want to talk about today is just that we can no longer think about tech and AI over here and the government and military over here. I think it felt illegitimate even 10 days ago when Donald Trump shut down Fable. But I think with these new releases, they tend to build up the story that, no, this will be an ongoing conflict, that every new model that comes out now is going to push the frontier forward. Let's say we fixed all the bugs and we build all these guilds. The next model that comes out 6 months from now is likely going to be even more powerful and incite another round where every single open source model and tool has to be rebuilt. And every single company now needs to constantly rescan. And you think about the amount of inference that is necessary to do this. And in fact, sometimes it might be that the existing software cannot be fixed. It's just fundamentally, inherently not good enough. And we might need to do things like what people are doing, rewriting all their applications in functional programming, where you have less likelihood of memory leaks and things like that, like Rust. So this is just the new world we live in, and the government's going to be heavily involved given the defense implications.
Yeah, I mean, we've lived largely in cybersecurity world. Actually, I should say I have not lived in cybersecurity world, and the reason lots of us haven't flocked there is because it's been a story of balance, right? Speak for us as entrepreneurs building businesses around software. We largely have been able to go about our business, which is to build these new pieces of functional value, and if we kind of follow best practices, we'll all be good. And by the way, what always happens is once a quarter, maybe sometimes once a month, you get a thing like one of these modules that you're using in your application needs to be updated because it's a thing. And what happens is you sit down and we talk about the risk associated with it, because we're busy doing other shit. Right? We don't really want to be upgrading pieces of software because we're busy building new pieces. And now what we're saying is, not only will you, Matt, and I, we won't have access to Mythos to go in, scan our software. Yeah, the fundamental components that we use are sort of infrastructure related, yes. But there's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of libraries that we all use, or we use commonly because it makes sense to get it from somebody else. And many, many, many of those will need to be updated, not just once. They'll be constantly need to be scanned. And so there's a real issue that if I'm a sort of mid-tier business, I'm not Cisco, right? I don't get access to this thing, but I have something of value that 5 million businesses in the world use, and that needs to be scanned, and it needs to be continuously scanned, right? Mm-hmm. As a new model comes out, as we make a change. So there's going to be haves and have-nots in this situation as we go forward, while we need to try and get back to this world of balance. I don't know if there's going There has to be, right? We'll have to
I mean,
refine
that's
balance in
exactly the
cybersecurity.
question. Yeah, when we were talking today, I was like, there's this new battle opening up. And rather than try to figure out who's going to win that battle, let's just acknowledge that every company in the world in the next few months will have potentially not just script kiddies and hackers trying, but large government institutions constantly, whether they're malicious or trying to be helpful, like white hat hackers, constantly evaluating and attacking essentially everything. Every piece of software will be under attack all the time. And because the capabilities of AI are so hard to predict, both their timing and what they're good at and what they're not good at, this is going to just be a new state of affairs. And, so once we acknowledge that the battle's happening, you know, once you start to have a permanent battle, what do you get? You get armies and generals and new forms of hierarchy and institutions which help coordinate. And so I would imagine that instead of getting hosting from AWS, you'll get hosting and cybersecurity from AWS or Google, which will be providing, I think, maybe like that white hack. It's constantly looking with its best state of the art and also constantly evaluating the incoming people who are looking at your website and looking at what they're doing, denial of service.
It makes me think that models, the latest high-end models, are going to be the new oil in a sense, right? If you're sitting in Brussels right now, it's been a week since you last had access to anything like Fable. You now realize it's even worse. At least you're part of a large continent, right? You potentially have the capability, if you amass all the resources of the however many countries there are now in the EU, and you start doing your own thing, you could potentially catch up. But if you're outside one of the superpowers, it's like begging for oil, right?
Yeah, and I think that's been the case for a long time, and there's just a new axis of conflict that's added to that. I mean, if you don't have access to the latest chips, you're outside. If you don't have access to free trade, if you don't have access to high technology or your ability for your executives to do business in the US or in the international finance system, I mean, there's always been these countries on the outside. I think there is a exercise of power that is perhaps replacing capitalism as the new world order, right? I mean, people are really mad about, capitalism, late capitalism. It's like, well, guess what comes next? Xi, Putin, someone like Macron maybe in Europe kind of executing their will and becoming the focal point for national security at the top of a hierarchy. On the other hand, you might get a continuance of capitalism, which I would define as, individual property rights and individual freedoms. And maybe that new system is we actually have to go rebuild from scratch a software and infrastructure layer that is intrinsically secure, because that's the saving grace. And maybe that's always been what has allowed this kind of independence online, is that you can make intrinsically secure software. It's just a fact of life that we went really fast and broke things over the last 20 years, to quote Mark Zuckerberg, right? But there's no reason you can't have cryptographically secure, mathematically verifiably secure communications. But we just haven't chosen to do that. So if we do live in a world where Donald Trump has access to everybody's secrets because the NSA suddenly cracked everybody, and they might be doing that right now and have access to everything you've ever done and said, and that can be used against you. The National Enquirer president very much understands how to use secrets to get what he wants. And, so does Xi, who runs and Putin, who run gigantic security apparatuses. That's what they do. They compromise people and then leverage them. You can do that at an absolutely insane scale. On the other hand, can we build a system that is intrinsically secure and maintain individual freedoms? And that's an open question. I think that's for me, there's going to be a conflict, and how that resolves will very much change how we think of ourselves in 10 or 15 years.
Last week, towards the back end of the episode, we started talking about red flags or signals or indicators of something. The answers are different, but the question remains. What are the signals or the signs we should be looking for, either in the near term or the medium term, to understand how this is shaping up?
Well, I think a big one is, do we get things like Fable released? And last time we discussed the possibility that we were never going to get another model like Fable, a leading edge model that significantly advances our capabilities and we have kind of unfettered access to. We got used to that. We had Opus 4.0, 4.5, 4.8, and then we got Fable 5, and we were really excited about it for about 3 days until it got shut off. And when we talk about individual freedom and access to cutting edge technology, that could have been the high watermark. And we might get a model better than Fable maybe a year from now. But instead of the gap between what the federal government has and what the richest corporations and richest people in the world have, and then what somebody who's, tier down, like the average person, it might be substantial. And that hasn't been the trend of technology over the last 20, 30 years. Famously people say anyone in the world can get an iPhone and nobody can get anything better than an iPhone. That's like a pretty, equal distribution of access. If not, what you do with that iPhone or how much money you make might be different, but you got access to the same basic layer. And for a while, we had this really nice thing that we had this incredible technology that no one really understood and could do almost anything. And we had it at the exact same time that, Donald Trump got access to it, maybe, if not days apart. And now we might see months or years of lag. So the federal government and these big institutions can figure out the security implications by the time the rest of us get it, so that if somebody did get it and became a hacker with it, all of the important government institutions have already been protected. But that also means that the federal government would have, the Edward Snowden times 1,000 capabilities to go in and hack anybody, access all kinds of information, and then use that same AI to execute who knows what they would do, influence campaigns, propaganda campaigns, leveraging and compromising people, stealing things. Who knows, right? It's a very different world than the one where everyone has access to the same technology at the same time.
Scary.
And this is like the last 2 episodes have been bummers. We had this fun episode with Fable and we were really excited. And then it was just like, nope. No AI. You don't get the AI anymore. No Fable for you.
Well, yeah, it's
and now
tempting
it's like,
to
and by the
think.
way, it might never come back.
Yeah, it's tempting to think that those guys over the Breakneck podcast are full of shit. They're hyping this thing up that of course we'll get, Mythos. We'll get in a couple of weeks, or we'll get at least Fable 5 in a couple of weeks, and they'll just, and that will happen because Anthropic will have worked out the guardrails and they'll have locked that down and we're all good to go. Conceivable, possible, hasn't been possible as of yet to really lock down any models sufficiently. I guess it has been sufficiently, but now the bar is much higher in terms of what sufficiency looks like. But the real issue you just pointed out is exactly, that's all well and good that we have Fable 5, but the real version, Mythos, is over with state actors to do with as they would like to do with.
Yeah,
And that,
and it gets it was funny. We talked about AI 2027 and we both said, I don't think this is going to happen. And we talked about it last year, but we started paying attention and we said, well, I'll look for evidence that AI 2027 was wrong, because it gave a really doomsday scenario where it could potentially have gone well, but maybe potentially we all get killed by robots. And there's a lot of leaps between even where we are now and the robots killing us. But, some of the things that they talked about in AI 2027 was cybersecurity becoming completely broken, which creates even more motivation and control for state actors, and then creates these kind of reinforcing things where maybe the U.S. government, we don't have elections again, and maybe China, if we don't, then China definitely doesn't even have elections at all. But it's not just cybersecurity that's on the table. We have things like biosecurity. So it turns out that our bodies are governed by a genetic code, which is just a string of bits. Well, guess what's really good at reading through gigantic streams of bits, interpreting them, and then hacking them? Mythos. And so, they had announced as part of the Mythos release these viruses which can bring in specifically rewritten parts of genetic codes. And that could do things like cure sickle cell anemia or various types of genetic problems or cure diseases or cancer. Like it can target specific cancers, and it would just be release a virus into your body. It goes and it fixes that one little snippet of DNA. But of course, the same technology could kill you. Or, I think an interesting thing that happened in the last year is that Putin and Xi were talking, President Xi from China, and it came out that Xi is very worried about a virus that's designed just to kill him. It would make everyone else just slightly sick and kill Xi because it would have a very particular set of instructions that just matched his DNA. And so he didn't want people getting access to his DNA, right? Okay, I mean, that's like a pretty far-fetched scenario, but this guy's worried about it, and I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
far less informed than Xi. Apologies to the breakneck listeners, but I do not have state level access to leading edge science anymore. If he's worried about that, and those are the type of things that if a model is as good as Mythos, maybe something 10x better comes along in 2 or 3 years, we can say, well, we can fix our cybersecurity systems. The same logic of we can make intrinsically cryptographically secure infrastructure may be true, but it definitely isn't true for our biology. There is no stable, secure biological substrate that we can kind of live with. If a virus gets delivered that can kill us, we know that we just go down, and there's no backstop against that. There's no way to guard against that in the same way that you can with, for instance, encrypting communications as they go through fiber optics.
Yeah, I think as you list them out, the other challenge here is that we have dealt with these threats before. We just deal with them one after another. Very rarely can I think of us having to deal with these things in parallel, right? We had COVID, on the bio side. On the cybersecurity, the cyber side would be Y2K, where we had a fixed timeline we had to deliver. Nuclear weapons and nuclear threat, all that type of stuff. They typically have maybe one a decade we have to deal with. Our ability to deal with all of these, given the certain kind of political dynamics that are ongoing right now, it's interesting. Although I will say, kudos to the US administration for appearing to act in a pretty stable, rational, logical manner if we're believing the information we're hearing here, where there is a real threat, a real
I wouldn't
cybersecurity threat
ascribe
emerging.
any kind of internal logical
Oh,
consistency.
you're ascribing the even a blind squirrel finds a nut type of
Any
pattern
number of
here.
reasons.
Well, so we've been talking at the macro level for a while. Let's talk at the sort of the micro level, a thread that we've been talking about for well over a year now, which is the jagged frontier. What is AI capable of doing? What is it actually doing? We've talked a lot about cybersecurity. What about the more mundane stuff? And there was a report that came out of Anthropic this week that really got me interested, which I read and will post as usual on the breakneckpodcast.com. So the report is called Agentic Coding and Persistent Returns to Expertise. So it's a study of interactive agentic coding based off of about 4,000 Claude code sessions from late last year to April of this year. And there were two things that really caught my attention. The first is one that I empirically am experiencing, which is in the title, this idea of return to expertise. And this is one that I just want to decode for people a little bit. Return on investment, this idea you put $1 in, how many dollars do you get back? We've talked a lot about, especially in the time of AI, around return on intelligence, right? What is, now that you have more intelligence available at a lower cost, what is the return you're getting on it? In the context and thinking about the kind of the jagged frontier, I think we're now seeing that the bottleneck is in many cases not in accessibility to intelligence, it's accessibility to expertise. So return on expertise is what's important. And so what they found in this study is that looking at these Claude code sessions, who was more successful? Was it somebody who was really good at writing software, or was it somebody who had more expertise in the domain that they were trying to solve a problem for? And the answer is expertise. So if you put a software engineer and you put a um, I don't know, financial modeler together, and they both are tasked with creating a financial model that was super cool and worked really well. The person with the domain expertise has the edge significantly. Now, Matt, I know you'll poo-poo the study when you look at the stats and you work your way through, and you're like, yeah, it's directional at best, but it is what I'm experiencing right
Yeah,
now
so
in the
this is an
real.
Anthropic produced report, and Anthropic has traditionally done an extremely thorough job, but their websites are so beautiful that you can't complain. They're just gorgeous. They put a lot of effort into that. Um, just reacting to this report, and we're seeing an accelerated version of factory optimization. There's this book called The Goal by Elihu Goldratt, and it has a theory of constraints, which is that a system will be dominated and bottlenecked by its constraints. And the only thing that matters once you have a constraint is addressing the constraint. Everything else is secondary, right? And so if we had a deficit of capital, well, then the returns to capital will be quite high precisely because capital is scarce. If you were missing land, if you're missing equipment, and then suddenly you add land or you add equipment, then there'll be high returns. There'll be a big change in the behavior of the system. On the other hand, if you have infinite amounts of fresh water and infinite amounts of energy and infinite amounts of land relative to your constraint, well, then adding more land or water, money or whatever will not solve problems, right? And we see this in companies all the time. It's like they have a ton of money and then they raise a bunch more, and it doesn't make the company any better because if capital is not the constraint, the returns to capital will generally be pretty poor because that capital will just be essentially fallow. Same thing with intelligence, is that when we are constrained by intelligence, we get these amazing improvements by bringing in somebody really smart, whether that's an AI or human. And here we see returns to expertise, which means the domain knowledge. And in general, I believe that the reason experts do well is because AI performance these days is not dominated by intelligence, but in fact by the ability to create evaluations and then iterate against them.
The reason I believe this to be the case is the context, which is another word for the expertise, but the context is encoded in disparate places, right?
Mhm.
Depending on the task. In a software world, it's all in a code base primarily, and then at least if if your task is to fix a piece of software, it's all right there in front of you, and you know the test is, oh, there, it's broken. Okay, let me work out how to fix it. Our jobs are a bundle of tasks and a bunch of context as well as data. That context is encoded in our brains, on pieces of paper, institutional knowledge, in a bunch of different places. It's not accessible to the AI. It wasn't trained on it. It can't be stuffed into the context window, or at least not easily. It takes time to do it. So why is that important? It's only important because there's only one thing that I ever care about when it comes to AI, and that is time, right? The more time we have, whether it's a cybersecurity issue or AI coming to take our jobs or whatever it may be, the more time we're very flexible, we're a very adaptable species. We will work it out. And
Mhm.
so this to me is actually pretty interesting. It's validating my thinking, which is all of this context is outside of the training and context window for these LLMs. They'll get there eventually. So, but what it means, it's going to slow down. So if you're worried about it stealing your job, cybersecurity aside for a second, there's a big challenge to be overcome, and we have time and we can deal with it. So that was kind of the first thing that came to mind when I read the report.
Yeah, if expertise is the limiting factor, it's going to take much, much longer for the AI to get significantly better at human jobs than it has been on just training on gigantic corpuses of data, either available online or on coding where it's able to build its own training data. If it's things like,
Exactly.
related to our job where that data isn't readily available in training, it might take a lot longer. On the other hand, it might generalize and start to figure things out a lot faster. So it's not a But it's
The
nice to
only thing is
see.
I don't think generalization's gonna help in a world where we have access to so much intelligence. It's about it's it goes back to craftsmanship, right? The quality of your product, and the quality one measure is how well does it solve a problem? How to go back to the G example, how well have you fine-tuned it to his DNA? Right? If it kills everybody around him but not him, because it generalized, yeah, that was okay, but that wasn't the guy we were, sorry guys, but it was him we
I
were
think I
after.
mean
So,
generalization. Like it's when we talk about something grok, like an AI grokking something, it's not just that it got really good, but it was able to see the training set and then create the correct interpolation between the training set data or the right extrapolation to things outside its training set. And we see that behavior where there's consistent modes, but that generally has been a failure because I think there's an intrinsic trade-off, which is the more creative you are, the more likely you are to be wrong in these stable situations. So they're trying to build AI that is both very good at getting things that it should get right correct every single time. But that really is going to mean they're turning a knob where it can't be as expressive. In general, you don't have artists doing accountancy, but that's what you're trying to make these models do is both at the same time, and it's not producing exceptionally good results. And there isn't a good way to parse it either. I mean, you need all of this capability for the models to be smart. You can't just make an AI that's creative and an AI that's a good accountant. You have to kind of take it all, the good and the bad.
exactly. So Matt, time to wrap this baby up.
This is a pretty doom and gloom episode. Hopefully everybody
It
who's
is.
watching it more prepared for the future. But geez.
Every 90 days, we have something that kind of blows our mind, and we spend the following 3 months working our way through it. And it just feels like this is where we're at. This is the first time ever, I think, we've done 3 episodes in a row about the same topic.
It just keeps
So,
more stuff keep coming out. I feel like whatever we covered last time, I don't want to have like the viewer completely misinformed or missing key pieces.
yep. All right. Well, we better leave it there. We're out of time. We will stay on top of it, folks. We'll be posting during the week on the website, breakneckpodcast.com. Who knows what we'll be talking about next week.
See you next time, Ian.
See ya. Bye bye.